Yeah, I might have done it. I might have got
Oh,
it.
now it's usually the other way around. It's usually Facebook that gives
I
us all the
know
trouble.
Facebook is I don't know why YouTube is being said. I had to go to a completely different browser, but I think we're working here.
I'm not seeing
Let me
anything
know,
on my
folks,
end.
in the YouTube chat if it's working. It looks everything looks good from my end. So we'll see. We'll keep talking. I'll hope for. Oh my God. It's
Oh,
up.
there it
It's
goes.
working. Oh yeah, we're good. Thank you. Sorry, folks, you didn't miss anything except for me kind of vamping about hurricane birding.
Yeah.
We'll so I don't know what the deal is, but we're working now, and
All
we'll
right, we're working now. So for all of you on YouTube who just
good
joined us,
lord,
hello.
good lord,
And
what
you
a.
got to see us. You got to see some sausage making here
It's been
from
a
for
while
the
since we've had to
people
do
on
that.
Facebook. So
It used to be
the
a
YouTube
version 1.0 thing.
right. So the YouTube people, we're going to just jump straight into the birds here and welcome
Yeah.
all of you. Um, Northern Illinois, a green bird, yellow green bird in
Yellow
Northern
green bird.
Illinois in August. Um, Not a whole lot of things it can be.
No. No, this time of year, one of the things that we've got going for us is that all the birds are looking a little bit rough. Most of them have pretty much finished breeding. They're all looking to start molting. So birds typically go through, 3, 4, depending on how you count it. Very energy intensive aspects of their life, like cycles of their
Yeah.
annual life, and two of those are migration. The other one is nesting, and the other one is molting. All of those are extremely energy intensive, and they don't like to do any two of them at the same time. So as soon as they are finished breeding, as soon as the chicks are out of the nest, they can start putting all their energies into finding food, getting those feathers replaced and growing and getting prepared for fall migration. And so what you see this time of year, one of the kind of defining characteristics of birding in late summer is that the birds are looking awfully rough. And Greg, I can tell this bird has got some kind of broken feathers. The tail feathers in particular look absolutely
Yeah.
a mess. This is pretty typical late summer, worn feather, worn body, all that stuff for these birds. But there are a few things that stand out to me. One is sort of a long, thin bill, which would rule out a lot of the finches and sparrows. Longish, I should say.
Yeah.
Well, thinnish. That would be more than longish. And long tail, real long tail on this bird.
Long
Looks like
tail.
it's got a couple wing bars, maybe, but generally kind of all yellow all over. Even in the undertail cover, there
Yeah,
aren't many birds around that are gonna look like that.
and not lemon yellow like a goldfinch. It's
Yeah,
green.
yeah,
It's
green yellow.
green. And when you've got that greenish yellow, that really cuts the number of possibilities down to just a few. Um, so let's take a look at them. And there.
Especially in northern Illinois.
Yeah. Yeah. So the bird in question is on the left. It's an orchard oriole. It's a female orchard
Orchard,
oriole.
Oriole.
And really, the only three things that you might possibly run into, painted bunting in northern Illinois is very rare, but
Possible these
not
days.
unheard of.
Yeah.
Not unheard
Yeah.
of. They do breed on the very southern part of the state. Summer tanager and Tennessee warbler are the two
Yeah.
others that really are the only things that you could confuse it with in this plumage.
And probably summer tanager in particular is the main confusion species. It's a little early for Tennessee warblers, though I'd expect, by late August they're starting to head
Yeah,
into, especially these kind of first fall, very greenish birds. But
very green.
although but they're gonna be awfully small and kind of fidgety with a very very thin bill. And of course, the flight feathers are not going to be nearly as yellow as they are going to be in our orchard oriole here. Um, and the undertail cover for Tennessee warbler is famously always going to be white, regardless of how orangish or greenish that plumage is looks to you. The undertail covers, which is kind of covered on your comp, and I don't want to criticize your comp, Greg. I know you're the comp master, but the feature here is a little bit covered by the branch. In any case, it's got a little bit more of a head pattern and a very thin bill. Painted bunting, thicker bill, thicker finch bill. awfully small, relatively compact, doesn't have that long tail. But the summer tanager is the most interesting one because they can be kind of long and lanky. And
Mm-hmm.
I frequently associate summer tanagers and orchard orioles with the same sort of habitat, that kind of brushy second growth stuff. Summer tanagers will be in the hardwoods, the broadleaf forests a little bit more, but orchard oriole and summer tanager frequently overlap in terms of habitat this time of year.
Yeah,
Any
and
time of year.
the main thing here, in addition to everything that Nate has just said, is just the overall structure and how the
Mm-hmm.
oriole, of all of these birds, the oriole has that long graduated tail.
Yeah.
Whereas the summer tanager, which has the longest tail and the lankiest of the three, still has more of a robin shape than that longer,
Yeah.
thin oriole kind of shape. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
then you look at the bill size, the
Yeah.
relative bill size, and there's really no mistaking it. But yeah, and
Yeah, for
especially
sure.
in northern Illinois, you see a largish green bird. Although orchard orioles can be small, I mean they can be approaching.
They're the I was going to say they're the most warblery of the orioles. Yeah, and in
Yeah,
fact, I think you're more inclined to mistake an orchard oriole for one of the warblers like a Tennessee than you are with, say, a Baltimore oriole.
absolutely, and
Because Baltimore
especially young
oriole is
birds
more
that are
tanager
still
shaped.
growing
Yeah.
out their tails. I mean, this looks like an adult
Mm-hmm.
female. Um,
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
and the young birds can have even shorter tails, so you got to pay a little extra attention there. But
Mm-hmm.
yep, so the bird in question here is a orchard oriole.
We have a question on YouTube. Richard Haynes asked, "What about pine warbler?" Similar. Pine warbler generally has more of an eye ring, a little bit more. I don't know if you want to back up there real quick, Greg.
Sure.
Pine warbler, boy, they even the brightest ones tend to be kind of paler towards the back end of the underparts. They typically aren't, yellowish green all the way throughout the entire underpart of the bird. And also they do have some white spots on the tips of the tail, if I'm
They do.
not mistaken.
Yeah.
So the undertail is gonna rule out those. Even though pine warbler does have wing bars like this orchard oriole does,
Hmm.
um, and they can look similar. Yeah.
But yeah, the underside of the tail would be a dead giveaway, and it would
Yeah.
be shaped more like the Tennessee warbler than anything else in
Yeah,
terms of just
for sure.
it's a little
For sure.
it's a little different, but a little lankier, but not much, not anything
Hmm.
near the oriole. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ontario. We are going to go up north there, eh? I
Kearney, although
didn't even.
Kearney might be farther south than a lot of parts of the United States.
That's true. Um, I didn't even do a comp for this bird because there really isn't
Falling
anything
down
you
on the
can
job.
mistake it for. However, it really confuses people.
It's a good one to talk about and a good one for people, especially throughout the eastern 2/3 of the ABA area to sort of be
Hmm.
on the alert for this time of year coming up into September, because it's a pretty common September migrant through a lot of the eastern 2/3 of the continent, and a reasonably common vagrant in the west as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, some things to think about. I mean, I'm definitely getting a warbler vibe from this bird, even without seeing the tail. Small, kind of plump, longish, thinnish bill, so it's not thick at the base like you'd expect a finch or a sparrow. And just the proportions just say warbler to me. Some things to
Hmm.
stand out. Things stand out. It's got that full eye ring, nice large white eye ring, and yellow wing bars, which are important for this bird.
Yep. And that bright green cap and the just plain gray face. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, in the east there, you're not going to find things like bush tits or wren tits or verdins or any of the other
Hmm.
little gray nondescript birds that we have out west. Um, a juvenile titmouse or chickadee, no, because they get the black pattern on their face pretty
Pretty
early.
before they even leave the nest. Yeah.
Yeah. Titmouse, not with that bright green cap. I mean,
Yeah,
they're always that dun gray color, that sort of steel gray color. Um, but yeah, that combination of yellow wing bar, bright green cap,
Yeah.
and the gray face with the eye ring is only one bird that we have in our area, and that's chestnut-sided warbler in its
Mhm.
first year of life.
Yeah, and I think it confuses a lot of people because most of the warblers, fall warblers in particular, get kind of a bad reputation for being extremely difficult, and some of them are. Usually, that is heavily carried by a couple, two, three species pairs, species trios. Um, Most of the time, most fall warblers will be their fall plumage will be looking sort of like a washed out version of the spring bird. And so it's a lot of the patterns that you focus in on, the colors that you focus in on when you're trying to identify these birds in the spring are going to be there in the fall in sort of a muted way, except except for a couple species, and this is one of them. The difference between this bird and its spring counterpart is pretty distinctive. Even the females, like
Yeah.
sometimes, fall males will look like spring females a little bit in some species, like Bernie and Warbler and stuff like that. But yeah, chestnut-sided warbler fall birds look absolutely nothing like their spring birds. Gone
Yeah.
is the bright yellow cap. Gone is even the hint of any chestnut side. But the
The black
yellow wing bars
mask.
are still there. The black mask, yeah,
Yeah.
anything going on. They act similar, like they do kind of like they have long tails and chunky bodies, and they kind of flash their tail around a little bit more than a lot of other birds do. And but the yellow wing bars are going to be there regardless, and that's really the only thing that is retained between the spring birds and the fall birds.
Yeah, and there's when you get familiar with these birds, birds like this, uh, worm-eating warbler and Lincoln sparrow is another one that comes to mind. And you're like, where are you going with this, Greg? Worm-eating warbler and Lincoln sparrow. They have a unique color combination that when you see that color combination, it really doesn't matter what else, that flat gray with the bright green, that combination really,
Yeah,
we don't have any birds with that
it's unique.
color, just like Lincoln Sparrow. It's like when you see it, that really beautiful kind of, I don't know how to describe
It's like an ochre green.
it's like an ochre,
beige.
avocado,
Yeah,
beige, brown.
yeah.
It's totally unique, and once you see it, you memorize it, and you're like, you can always get it.
Lincoln
And
Sparrow.
same with chestnut-sided warbler. Okay, let's Paonia, Colorado. So I used to live near Paonia. It is on the western slope, and it's down in the beginning of what they call the banana belt out there. But it's still that's where they grow peach trees and stuff. It's warmer than the rest of the.
They grow peach
Yeah,
trees in the banana belt.
in the banana belt in Colorado. But it's also as you're coming down like above town, there's a lot of neat area. There's aspen forests and a lot of sagebrush. I got my gray vireo, my lifer gray vireo, right outside Paonia.
I'll be honest, Greg. When you pulled this, when I was looking through the slides for this one, and I saw this bird, I was like, I don't want to do it. I hate identifying baby birds. I'll be frank. I don't like to do it. Most of the time, I wait around for the adult to show up and feed them, which is usually what happens.
Precisely why I
After a
picked this
while,
one.
or I just ignore them. I am lazy. I do not want to deal with baby birds. But I guess if we have to, why is this a baby bird? Well, look at that tail. It's stunted.
Yeah.
There's it's nothing there. You can see it's got a little bit of a gape
Yep.
as well. And the plumage is extremely fluffy and
just
non-distinct.
Yeah.
That's clearly a bird, and it's true. Birders sometimes get a lot of trouble for misusing the term juvenile because it does refer to a very, very specific and short-lived time in a bird's life where they are basically wearing the first feathers that they have after their downy feathers. And songbirds like this don't have much in terms of even down feathers. They look pretty naked and ugly until they get these juvenile plumage. This is truly a juvenile bird, Greg.
Yeah.
This is juvenile, however you want to pronounce it. This is one.
And so there's a few gray nondescript little birds that are found in western Colorado. We've got bush tit, you've got you've even got dipper. You've got, although that would be weird to have. Actually, the stream that runs
Weird
through
in a
there, you
tree.
get dippers there for sure.
Maybe.
But you've also got gray vireo. You've got gray flycatcher. But this bird has one thing that none of those have, and that is those. Really, the only thing on this bird that stands out is those bright green yellow edgings on the wings.
Mm. And the undertail.
And
I mean, the flat
there's
feathers
a little bit
are
of
the sort of things.
there's a little bit of pattern, or I'm sorry, color on the undertail covert, and
Yeah,
maybe a
chin.
little bit of color on the throat. And it's
hard.
also got
It's
an
hard
eye
to
ring.
determine. Yeah,
And it's
hard
also
to
got
tell
an eye
because
ring.
you know the thing about identifying birds from photos that is a little more difficult than identifying birds in the field is that the photo, the camera can trick you a little bit sometimes when it's trying to faithfully recreate colors. So things like yellows and greens can sometimes be brighter in photos than they would be in real life because the camera will essentially see them as reflections off the light off the leaves, and there are some pale leaves in this image, but I do get the impression based on the fact that the yellow does seem to be concentrated solely or mostly in the undertail and on the throat and on the wing edges, that this is more or less accurate, or at least we can tell that there is color in those places and not elsewhere on this bird, like on the chest, on the sides, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that really brings us down to two species that would be in that area at this time, and that would be yellow warbler and orange-crowned warbler. And there we go.
Seth Coffee has a question in YouTube. Asks, "Is it gray to keep them camouflaged?" Yeah, more or less.
I would
of times,
imagine.
juvenile plumages tend to be kind of indistinct and streaky in ways that adult plumages or even immature plumages, like the second set of body feathers that this bird is going to come to kind of break up the silhouette of the bird and make it easier for this bird to stay hidden at a time when it is extremely vulnerable.
Yes, and I say this is a yellow warbler.
Yeah,
because of the eye ring and the yellow in the wing. As they grow older, they get yellow in the tail. But young yellow warbler is one of the other, like chestnut-sided, that just and pine, those three in that first year, first 10 months plumage, they're just confusing as all get out, and we're gonna look at that at all. Doesn't that bill look too thick for yellow warbler? No, not at all.
Yeah, but I would say that a lot of these birds, especially extremely young birds, the bill is not as long.
It's not as
it
long
would
as
be
it
in an
would
adult
be.
that hasn't grown yet, and so
Yes.
you sort of get the impression where you are seeing the broadness, the breadth of the bill, and warblers, despite how we see them kind of in profile, do have fairly broad bills for catching bugs and whatnot. And
Yeah. And the bill
not
is also
not the length.
partially obscured by a branch.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
It doesn't help at all. But yes, when you see a baby bird with this short of a tail, and you know what it is, but the bill, as Nate said, is also going to be shorter and a little blunter, because it's all growing, and they do grow as the
Rachel
as the
Brenner
birds.
on YouTube asks, "How do you rule out Virginia's warbler?"
Well, I don't believe, I'm going to have to look. I looked at it this morning,
Range
but I
would be
don't
my
believe
first
that Virginia's
guess,
has yellow. I don't believe it has the yellow in the wing panel. I think it just has gray.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I am 90% sure of that, but let me just double check here. Virginia's, Virginia's has a completely gray wing panel.
Yep.
Which is a good way to tell it from
Orange Crown.
Nashville. Nashville.
Oh yeah, Nashville does have yellow in the fly feathers, doesn't it?
Yep. Okay. And boy, we're kind of cooking through these a little bit.
Considering how long we spent trying to get YouTube to work.
I know. All right, from New
More
Jersey.
multi
This is
warblers.
kind of a theme today.
Well, tis the season, isn't it?
Um, so we got a. I mean, it's a warblery thing. Uh, um, it's got yellow on it. It's got a thin bill. Um, I mean, the thing that stands out the most for me is the wing bars,
Mm-hmm.
um, and a little bit of it's got yellow. Hard to say. It's got definitely yellow on the face, on the top of the head,
Yes.
kind of greenish yellow in the face, but not really on the underparts as far as we can see too much.
The undertail looks a little bit yellowy, but as we talked about in the last bird, I
Yeah, I
get
can't
the
see that.
impression that
Yeah.
that is maybe more of a photo thing than it is an actual um, field mark for this bird because everything else looks pretty. It has that sort of weird kind of translucent green look that you usually see in photo artifacts, like reflection images. We can sort of see in the background of this bird, at least to my eyes.
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing with fall warblers, uh, when they're out of juvenile plumage, so that yellow warbler was in juvenile plumage, which
Mm.
they only hold onto for a very short amount of time, and then
Yeah,
they
like
begin
six
molting
weeks.
into the first basic,
Yeah.
and with the exception of chestnut-sided and maybe another, um, they begin to look like their spring plumage,
A little bit more.
and
Yeah.
and you can sort of begin to infer, you can sort of fill in the dots
Mm-hmm.
and sort of infer what this bird is going to look like. Um, so we go to and Lisa Walkerman Roseman asks if it's a pine warbler, and in New Jersey,
Good
uh,
guess.
in a
It's in a conifer.
non-deciduous tree with bright wing bars, that would be a really solid choice. Um,
Yeah, for sure. Some things that don't say pine warbler to me. It does have a little more of a pattern in the face than I like to see in a pine warbler, especially the cheek. That
mm-hmm,
dark cheek, I think, is something that we're seeing pretty truly and isn't, just a remnant. So I think the way that the feathers are sort of being replaced on the face and neck of this bird is sort of uh I don't know. I think it's showing some of the pattern of the bird that we would expect to see in its fall or even its spring plumage here. Like a darker cheek patch and then a sort of green
mm-hmm.
around the mustache, the malar, and then on the towards the crown.
Gavin Alving says pine warblers look nasty this time of year.
That is
at
also
least,
true.
at
That is
least they
also
like being terrestrial. What he's alluding to
true.
there is that you can
Accurate.
often find them on the ground,
Yep.
um, and get really good looks at them. Um,
Hmm.
Tim Callback says there's a second photo that gives better clues, which I didn't pick because this one's a little more confusing. Um, and so let's look at the comp. And there we go. So our bird is a black-throated green warbler, and the two species that really I think it could be confused with in New Jersey this time of year would be pine warbler and yellow-throated vireo.
Everyone's correct out there for tagging pine warbler as a bird to talk about for sure.
Absolutely. All
Yep.
three of these species have bright white wing bars. All three of them have some yellow on the face and the underside to a
Hmm.
certain degree. Um, we can get the vireo straight out the door just by looking at the tail. So this bird has white on the underside of the tail feathers.
Hmm.
It has a black and white tail pattern, which is usually indicative of a warbler.
Warbler's
So
not
just
very
based on the
nice.
tail, we can get rid of yellow-throated vireo, but also notice the bold spectacles and the heavier bill.
Heavier bill
On the
with a sort of a hook at the tip of it too. A yellow-throated
Yeah,
vireo has a bill that looks a bit more like a corvid bill or a shrike bill than a warbler bill, which tends to be relatively straight.
right. Len Kopka says Blackburnian could be confused also. It could, but
Sure.
not in this view because Blackburnian always has those bright white stripes,
Mm.
often called braces, on the back,
On the
and this
back.
bird has a
Yeah.
very plain back. Um,
Hmm.
so in this view, Uh, it's we can easily tell it's not a Blackburnian just by the back pattern. But the
Blackburnian,
face pattern,
even the young birds and the females this time of year tends to be a bit more peachy in the
mm-hmm.
color rather than sort of bright greenish yellow that this bird is showing. Um, they're a bit more subdued than this.
Right? He's telling me to look at Sibley first winter, so I'll take a look here and
The books are
see
over there in my new office. They're too far away. I can't
what
slide
he's.
over
Oh, I've
there.
got it right. I want to see what he's talking about here, um, because I
I've got the
am.
app.
Yeah, first winter, but you can still see that it's got the two braces. The two white lines framed in dark on the back.
Mm-hmm.
That just this bird just doesn't have, and that is something that Blackburnian warbler always has,
You don't always see it because
except
they
in
tend to be
juvenile
like,
plumage.
yeah, you don't always see it because they tend to be so high up in the
Yeah,
tree. So I think given a different view, as Greg said, we'd want to throw it in there. But this kind of straight on, head on, sidelong view, you can see the back really well.
yeah. So the pine warbler, and I think several people have said pine warblers can look like just about anything. But
Yeah.
a few things stand out here is that, if it's starting to show yellow, um, if it's starting to show yellow, it, it's gonna have yellow underneath all the way down as a pine warbler does. It's really not gonna be just in the face like this black-throated green warbler is. Pine warbler also tends to have a little bit of a heavier bill. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
It's a
in
very
that first year
Vireo-esque bill.
plumage, it's the face is very gray, as you can see here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very different from the black-throated green, which has that yellowish and green, that green cap sort of just
Yeah.
framing the black, or in this case, gray auricular.
Grayish. Yeah. So the auricular on a black-throated green is darker than is like a grayish green, kind of a dark color, not certainly not the bright greenish yellow that you'd see all the way around it. And that's why I say, like, you can look at the face on this bird, on our mystery bird, and it's starting to show that pattern that we see in black-throated green warbler that certainly stands out quite clearly in the spring, and but that we frequently see in fall on these birds too. It's in the middle of a molt. It's coming out of that young plumage. This is probably a first year bird, isn't it? This is the bird that is
Yeah,
actively molting into its first basic plumage. Um, yeah, but it's got that ear there that's kind of darker and duller than everything else around it. And Blackbirdian has that a little bit too. So that's definitely an overlapping feature for that bird. But everything else says, if it's not a Blackburnian, it's a black-throated green for this guy.
yeah. Tim Callback asked in the chat, where did I find a yellow-throated vireo with a whitish throat or a white throat? I don't remember where I found that. But looking at that, it could be
Looks a little like a white-eyed vireo.
It could be a juvenile white-eyed that was misidentified.
Yeah,
Um,
it does have a white-eyed look here. Another bird to consider when we're talking about these things too.
but yeah, I mean but yeah, white-eyed, yellow-throated. Again, both bright wing bars,
Mhm.
yellow underneath, and
Spectacles.
both of those that have the spectacles. So yeah,
Yeah.
it just yellow-throated would have more yellow. But yeah, I think that photo was misidentified by the photographer.
Birdie on a
Okay.
high wire.
Yep. Always. Let's go to San Francisco. Hello.
Ooh, so I'm actually glad you. I needed a drink. I needed to gather my thoughts about this bird because this is one that I'm glad you put on here because this is one of the most frequently misidentified birds, at least where I live, throughout the entire late summer, because it looks so very different than it does during the rest of the year. And because this bird was in San Francisco, I mean, this is probably a bird that is frequently misidentified across the entire breadth of North America, or at least the ABA area. Because yeah, so some things to think about on this one. It's sitting on the ground. It's got a thicker bill than the warblers we're looking at. It's got kind of a chunkier body, long tail, definitely gives a New World sparrow passerellid look to this one. It's streaky. We usually talk about plain breasted versus streaky
Yeah.
breasted as a way to kind of break the sparrows up into workable groups, but that's you're not always able to do that with these juvenile birds.
But the streaks are kind of limited, and it's kind of streaky all over.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of sparrows we can just kind of get right out the door. I think some of among the common ones, song sparrow, which it's a more robust bird, but it's also much heavier streaked, and in
Yeah.
juvenile plumage,
Even
even
in
more
juvenile.
so.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so we can get that right out the door. Um, Boy, in
What
San
else would be in San
Francisco,
Francisco? Golden crowned, I should say. Golden crowned warbler. Yeah, it's
or
not a zono.
golden
Zonos
crowned
have a
sparrow.
sparrow,
Yep.
golden winged sparrow, golden crowned warbler. Golden crowned sparrow. This is definitely not a zono.
No.
Zonotrichia is the big, thick bodied, pot bellied sparrows with relatively short tails. They have a very distinctive look, and even though the young birds are streaky on the front, they tend to have always a more of a pattern on the face than this bird. There's not a ton going on this bird on the face, though there are a couple things that are noteworthy.
Yeah.
For instance, the black eye line that runs
Well, I
from the
mean, it's
lore through the
black.
line
That's
to
kind of
out the
pushing
back.
it. It's got so
Dark.
yes,
Let's say
as we've
darker
said,
than the rest of the face.
it is, and as we've said, it's with a lot of these juvenile birds, you have to sort of fill in the gaps and imagine what it's
Right.
going to look like, and like if you squint at this, you can actually see what's there, and a lot of
Yeah,
the
it's
the
gonna the crown is darker than the rest of the face.
yep,
It has a dark eye line.
but it has a
Fairly
paler supercilium.
paler supercilium. Yeah.
But the streaks underneath is what throws people off, and
Yep.
and this
Every
is
time.
this is a Spizella sparrow. So those are like the
Spizella.
uh,
Brewers,
chipping brewers,
chipping,
clay colored
clay
field.
colored.
Um,
Yep.
so in California in August, we really don't have to worry about clay colored or field,
Extremely rare in California.
especially not in
Field
this plumage.
field is very rare in California.
Yeah, and clay coloreds don't nest anywhere near California.
No.
So really, we're down to brewers and chipping, and so let's take a look at those two.
Yeah, Brewers is tough. That's a bird that I don't see certainly very often because it's an interior west species, but it is, possible as a vagrant just about anywhere on the continent. But some things that certainly stand out about Brewer sparrow is just the all over paleness.
Yep,
It is
very
brown, but it's more
grayish.
of a beigey brown, yeah, tan gray brown, as
Yep,
opposed to kind of the deeper colors on the flight feathers of the other bird. And the eye ring, there's no eye ring on our now correctly identified as a chipping sparrow San
yep.
Francisco bird. It does have the eye line. The eye line is always a good field mark for a chipping sparrow, and the dark
The
cap,
dark
even though it's a
lures.
streaky cap, it's you can still see a dark cap on that bird.
Yeah, and Lisa mentions that the Brewers has a smaller bill,
Mm-hmm.
and it does. But there is some variation, and that can be hard to tell, especially in juvenile birds because they're still growing. Although these two are. Tim Callbeck says if Vesper was Spizella,
Yeah,
yes,
for
it's
sure.
got that
Brewers
same.
looks like, yeah,
It's got that same open-faced look, the pale lures, the big white eye ring.
yeah. It's
And
like
then
someone took a chipping sparrow a body and shoved it into a Vesper sparrow or a Vesper sparrow skin, and that's what you'd end up with a brewer sparrow.
Absolutely. Let's see here. Oh yeah, we've got. Are we done with the Brewers and Chippy?
I think so. Chipping
Oh,
sparrows always
one
one to
thing.
watch out for,
Oh,
and
there
the
was
winter
one thing.
birds. The winter birds are always tough too because the summer chipping sparrow, at least where I live, very common suburban bird that you see across all sorts of landscapes, parks, people's yards every time. And the classic summer chipping sparrow is so distinctly marked It's got that nice clean gray breast. It's got that sharp eye line, the bright, shiny almost rusty cap, and a black bill. These winter birds definitely, in these younger birds, definitely confuse people a lot because they are so different from what we expect on a sort of a classic chipping sparrow. So it's worth
Yeah.
taking a look at them and sort of having them in the back of your mind because they can be one of those birds you're like, I know this, but I don't know this. Not flagging anything, and it
Well,
can, it can confuse you.
and at this time of year, August, September, um, young chipping sparrows travel in small flocks, half a
Mm-hmm.
dozen family groups, a couple, two, three family groups get together, and they very often feed high in the trees like warblers.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Yeah,
see
I've
them
seen
from
that.
below, and you see that light streaking and the kind of
Mm-hmm.
longish tail, and they're up there picking and flittering around like warblers. It
Mm-hmm.
can be really, really confusing.
They've
Um,
got that kind of light chip call note too, which sounds a lot like a number of different contact calls with warblers.
yeah.
Yeah, another. This is a good one.
This is a
So,
good one.
and Tennessee too. I like
Yeah.
that because if it was any other part of the ABA area, it might be a little bit easier. But a lot of people forget about Tennessee for this bird. Yeah, so we're looking at another kind of chunky little bird with a lot of streaks and a relatively short, thick bill. It's got a gape, so we know we're looking at a recently fledged bird. These young birds can be tough, and this is another one that throws a lot of people. But I definitely get a sparrow look from this one as well. So I think we're going to stay in the sparrow family.
I think so. I mean, it's just dark and sooty and streaky and um but if I'm reading the picture right, and I know I am because the person posted three or four different pictures of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is so there is one field mark that just gives it away immediately, and that is that slate gray tail with the broad white outer tail feathers. Um, and that's out east for us. That's only one bird,
You
and
see it flying away whenever you're driving down a rural road all the time
yep,
in the winter months.
yeah, and that is our slate colored dark eyed junco.
Mm-hmm.
And but the young birds can look like all kinds of things.
Yeah, so slate colored junco is one of those birds that people forget breed all the way down the southern Appalachians above like 3,500 feet. So you'll get, breeding slate colored juncos, which is actually a subspecies of dark-eyed junco called
Right.
carolinensis that's in the slate colored group. And the adult birds have a slightly different colored bill. They can be really tough to identify in the winter months. But yeah, they breed all the way down the southern Appalachians, all the way into like North Georgia and South Carolina and eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. And I tell you, every time I go up into the mountains, these birds, because I'm so used to being on like summer bird, like my mind is all set around summer birds, and so you don't usually think of dark-eyed junco where I live, outside of their breeding range as a summer bird. But if you go up high enough in the Appalachians,
Yep.
you're going to run into them, and the juveniles can be confusing, and the songs can be confusing because they sound a lot like pine warblers and worm-eating warblers. They've got that chipping sparrow. They've got that kind of trilly, bubbly song that sounds a lot like things. People forget that they're all the way down here in the south, but we
Yeah.
got we got our breeding dark-eyed juncos too.
Yeah, and as we were talking earlier, the juvenile birds, they have adult flight feathers. So the tail feathers and the
Mm-hmm.
wing feathers. The juvenile
Yes.
plumage, that they lose that really before they leave the breeding grounds, as you said.
Yes.
Warblers do that. We have in Birding Magazine, I think it's a 19-page article on juvenile warblers, and it's 19 pages of pictures of birds you've all seen, but couldn't
But not like
identify
that.
one of them. You
Yeah.
couldn't identify one of the
Yeah.
pictures.
Yeah. That's baby birds for you. That's
and
juvenile
and
birds. They
it's
can be
it's
really
it's
tough.
really an amazing article. And if you remember, you can go to our magazine archive and search that article up, and it's just amazing how these birds have this juvenile plumage that looks so unlike
Mm-hmm.
the adult plumage. except and especially in the warblers, the tail patterns, because they have the
Yep,
tail patterns,
that's right.
but they don't look anything like the adult,
Yeah.
and it's
So most birds,
extremely confusing.
a lot of birds, a lot of perching birds will change their body feathers, molt their body feathers twice a year. A lot of times, they'll molt their flight feathers, their wings and tails only once a year, and that's usually in the fall. And so, a lot of these birds, the flight feathers on these juvenile birds have to last through the fall, through the spring, and all the way to the next fall before they are replaced. So they hold on to these feathers for a very long time, but it also means that they end up, having adult looking flight feathers, as Greg says, on birds that look absolutely nothing like adults. And so it's always useful to look at the tail pattern, always useful to look at the wing bars if that's
Mm-hmm.
a field mark for a species, because those are the things that are going to reveal the identity of that bird to you in a way that the body feathers, as you've seen here, don't always, or at least not intuitively.
And in the case of some birds, like they'll come to mind immediately: scarlet tanager,
Mm.
Tennessee warbler, orange crowned warbler, but Tennessee much more. The first fall birds can show wing bars, for a bird that doesn't
Yeah,
have wing bars,
yeah,
and those fringes wear off very
wear
quickly.
off exactly.
And
Yep, they're kind of like
so,
little protective coatings
yeah,
for the actual feathers to give them a little bit more, because they have to. Again, this is the longest these birds have to hold on to these flight feathers in their entire life. Once they get on the regular cycle, they start replacing those flight feathers once a year, like all the adults do. But they're holding them on for like 3, 4, sometimes even 5 extra months in the cases
yeah.
of some of these birds that are breeding very early, and they have to hold out that whole time.
Well, we made it.
We did it. We
We
did it.
did it. Um,
Technical technical issues
Technical
be
things
damned.
and all. So I would like to remind everyone to pop into ABA community. If you're an ABA member, that is our member directory. It is also where we have Facebook like groups and forums, and it's a great place to meet your fellow ABA members and share your bird pictures and stories, and also ask us questions. So we are very easy to reach there. And also want to remind everybody, a week from tomorrow, the Boston, Massachusetts Community Weekend, sponsored by OM System Cameras. And it is a lot of fun with bird walks, birds and beers, all of it. Um,
It's all
so,
free, in case you
and
didn't
it's all
know,
free.
but we do ask you to register so we know how many
Yes,
people to expect. So you can go to aba.org, aba.org. It's right there at the top,
it's right there at the
and you
top.
won't
Yeah,
be able
you
to
can't
miss it
miss it.
if you're interested in checking that out. We'll be doing other community weekends later this year. I think we've got one in Seattle, Washington coming up.
Yeah, let me
I
see.
want to
When's
say
that
there's
one?
one in Minnesota, maybe before the end of the year. There's at least two more.
Let's see here. Where are the community
Yeah,
weekends this
Katinka
fall?
told us to do
We've
this.
got no, Minneapolis, Minnesota is in May. So coming up
That's
here,
right. Already this
yeah.
year.
So coming up here, we've got Boston in the 17th and 18th of August. We've got Seattle the 31st of August,
Yep.
and we've got
Labor Day.
Sacramento. We've got
That's the
Sacramento,
one.
California at the end of October. So yeah, we're gonna come see you guys. Come out and
We're coming
hang
to
with
you
us and do some birding
to do
and
some birding.
drink a few beers and talk bird
Whatever you
stuff.
want to do.
Yeah,
That's right.
or
There's
not.
usually some workshops too. It's fun stuff. Or not. Yeah.
Oh,
So
there's always photo workshops and things like that.
yep, for sure. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back in a couple weeks to talk about it again. If you're interested in helping support this and all the other kind of free resources that the ABA provides, we are a membership organization, so please consider joining the ABA, aba.org/join. Not only do you get, the warm, cozy feeling of helping to support these free resources, but you get access to our great magazines. You've heard Greg talking about the magazine archive, the identification vault. All that stuff is free to members, access to the
Yep.
ABA community social media site, and also discounts to partners like OM System, Beauty of Books, Cornell Lab of Ornithology, etc. things of that nature. So please consider joining the ABA. It's not terribly expensive, and you get a
No.
lot of cool stuff, and you help us
Yep.
out. So
And you help
we'll
us
be
out.
back,
Yep.
and you help us out. That's the most important thing, really. We will be back in a couple weeks. If you want a heads up, please go to aba.org and sign up for our Flight Calls newsletter. We'll
Yep.
give you a heads up when we do these things. We're trying to keep to a schedule. Ideally, we'll be back in 2 weeks, and we'll see you then.
We will.
Have everybody. Hope everybody has a great fall. We'll talk a little bit more bird identification in 2 weeks.
See you in a couple of weeks, folks.